downloads for that. Remember the.
Are we on?
You're like.
This is Senate Transportation Committee. I'm Rich Westman, I'm the chair, and we are about to hear from Clayton Clark.
Yeah.
And from Green Mountain Transit. Thank you, Clayton, for coming.
Thank you, Senator Westman, for having me. So appreciative to be able to talk to you all so early in the session. I'm excited to get to know you all as the new committee, and Senator Westman, I hope that your tenureship is as distinguished as your predecessor. Good luck. That will be hard shoes to fill, but happy to be able to work with you. So what I wanted to do is that it seems very clear that you all have an interest in learning more about the potential rural transfers. And so I want to talk about that, but I do want to give just a really brief overview of what GMT does. And then dive into the rural transfer that you got a briefing on yesterday, followed by what we're looking at with our urban operations, with potential service reductions, and hopefully leave most of the time for your questions and answers for the conversation. And so Green Mountain Transit is a municipality. We're established in 24 VSA. And right now we operate service in 5 counties, which are Chittenden, Grand Isle, Franklin, Lamoille, and Washington. The service in each of the counties is very different. In Chittenden County, that's where we have our fixed route service. And we don't provide any on-demand transit in Chittenden County the way we do in Washington and Franklin counties. And so on-demand transit is non-emergency medical transport, NEMT, older persons and persons with disabilities transport, O&D, other variety of other mobility for all and JARC, other acronyms for programs there. In Grand Isle, we contract with CIDR, Champlain Islanders Developing Essential Resources, to provide that on-demand transit. And we do also offer fixed route service for seasonal and support 2 ski areas, Stowe area and Sugarbush. So that's just a really quick background as far as the service that we provide. Before I start talking about the rural transfer that you heard about, I want to give you all sort of an origin story. And so I arrived at GMT about 2 years ago. I can tell you that there was a real leadership crisis that was happening at GMT because a majority of GMT's leadership team had put in their resignations and were getting ready to depart. And that crisis spurred an organizational assessment. And we're really thankful for VTrans for recognizing that we were in crisis and providing assistance to us with the funding for an organizational assessment, as well as some funding to add another position to the management team to help us. Because the reason for the departures, which Mr. Caldwell highlighted yesterday, was just the feeling that managers had that there was no way for them to successfully, do their jobs. They were feeling overwhelmed all the time. What I can tell you in my 2 years at GMT is that it feels like it's been crisis, management the entire 2 years. And so I can totally understand, why staff is feeling that way. I am relieved that we have stabilized the staff. And we had to take some actions to do that, but we haven't had a departure of a management or leader position since my arrival. And so when the org assessment came out, what it really did was showed that GMT presently has more service than it can effectively manage with the staff that we have. And so it was very clear to me, looking at the org assessment, that one of 2 things would need to happen. Either GMT would need to expand its capacity, and primarily that would be its administrative capacity, because we had a 42% reduction in managers over 12 years. Or we would need to think about having this service go to another provider. With GMT already the highest cost provider, it seemed like providing additional funds to GMT was something that VTrans was not interested in, and I could certainly understand. And so that's what then I think led to the push for us to have a study. And so in last year's T-bill, we did the study with Fauvel's report being the result of that. And so from my perspective, when I look at the rural transfer, the potential for financial savings, I think is great, but I think that the improved focus that GMT will have on in its urban system will probably be, the most beneficial thing that would be able to come out of this. I feel like GMT is doing many things poorly, and for us to be able to do a few things well, I think would be, better for morale and better for the people that we are providing service to. With that said, we have been somewhat tentative in our endorsement of a transfer because the fact is that we love our rural employees. These are folks that we've worked with for almost 20 years now in the Berlin area, and to have us, have these folks go someplace else is something that we don't take lightly. We've heard very clearly from them that they prefer the status quo, that they don't want to have a transfer. And so that certainly curbs our enthusiasm. When our board considered this a few weeks ago, we had a 4-hour retreat where folks from RCT, TVT, VTrans all came in and talked about the situation. Our board essentially said, you know what, we're concerned about transferring our employees. We're concerned about our employees either losing their jobs, which probably won't happen, but they may have not quite so good pay and benefits. So they took a position where we are committed to continuing to work through this process. Where we do see that there's the potential for positive on the whole system by doing this transfer. But we understand that the devil is in the details, that we may get along this process and see that there's things that are coming up that may be problematic. And if that's the case, we want to make sure it's clear that GMT will, gladly continue to serve in this area, in the areas that we currently do. We do recognize that our higher costs do influence the entire system. And so certainly when we heard from Ross and Stephen yesterday about, say, our Medicaid cost being, 50% higher than the next provider, we understand that that's a cascading impact, and we want to be good partners to the system. We do we recognize the logic behind an all or nothing approach in the sense that it certainly, if everything were to work perfectly, that would make sense. But I know sometimes in government, things don't work perfectly and shockingly. And I do think that one of the things that we should potentially keep on the table is if we find that there is a reason transfer doesn't make sense in one particular area, that we don't necessarily have to not think about this at all. I think that there still may be the possibility for some improvements, even if it's a partial transfer. In my mind, the trickiest thing that is going to be requiring us to navigate is Franklin County service. And so in Washington County, it would be a transfer to Tri-Valley Transit, which is another union provider. We have very good assurances from Tri-Valley Transit's executive director that, staff will be retained. They'll be incorporated into their Teamsters contract with as many of our provisions supported as possible. But in Franklin County, with rural community transit, they're a non-union provider. And so one of the things that I see as a potential problem is that I suspect that, the Teamsters are going to, not find a transfer to a non-union provider, something that they can tolerate. And I suspect that they will work to to prevent its transfer. So I think that that's just something that we need to be aware of, is that may become a complication that shows up in the process. I do want to, having heard Senator Westman, your question yesterday as far as like who gets left out. I think that from the rider's perspective and the community perspective, what will largely change is just the logo on the side of the bus.
I would just say I didn't.
Oh.
I asked, does anyone get?
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you for the clarification. So I think that the riders are not going to get left out because there's no service that we provide that RCT and TVT can't provide. And I think that they have shown really good community relations. I think that one of the things that GMT has struggled with is that we have operated under a model in our urban area where we issue assessments. Assessments are great, but it also means that we don't have to cultivate relationships. We don't have to go out into the community to convince folks to, provide us funding the way the other providers do. And I think that that has actually harmed, GMT by doing that or by not doing that. And so I think that RCT, TVT have demonstrated that they're good at working with communities, probably better than GMT has. So I don't think that people will be left behind if there is a transfer, other than the potential for current employees to either have not quite as good benefits or potentially not have a position. I'm going to move now to the urban service reductions, and unless you want to have questions and discussion here, or I could wait and we can have question and discussion at the end of my presentation. It's whatever you prefer.
With the committee questions, why don't you continue and we'll go to the end then.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So something that you may have seen in the news that's been pretty well covered is that GMT Urban is experiencing a financial cliff that is resulting from the us using up the last of our remaining COVID relief funds. And something that is important to keep in mind is that GMT really is like two separate transit agencies. Its rural transit and the urban transit are funded by separate federal programs. We're not allowed to mix the funds between the two. And so I want to make sure that folks understand that when I talk about urban service reductions, that I'm talking about the service that operates in Chittenden County, including the link service that a commuter service that connects in. So with our fiscal year 26, last year we had about a $3 million funding gap in fiscal year 26. Through this committee and the House committee's support, we were able to get $630,000 additional one-time dollars to help limit reductions. We were able to work with VTrans to find additional federal dollars that we were able to draw down. And so the good news is that what we had looked at a potential $3 million gap is now down to about 1.1, 1.2 million. And so so looking at fiscal year 26, I'm getting ahead of myself. Looking at fiscal year 25, we've already cut $700,000 worth of service. That's one of the reasons why it's also not as high as $3 million. In fiscal year 26, we're looking to do about another $1.2 million worth of cuts. And what really worries me is that in fiscal year 27 and beyond, our gaps are again in the $3 to $4 million range. And if those were to go through, GMT really would look like it did, 25 years ago, with very limited urban service by comparison to today's standards. We'd have, some primary routes, but certainly wouldn't have connections in the outlying areas. So, for example, right now we offer service that connects the town of Essex to Williston. Like service like that just would not be able to survive if we went forward with these funding gaps. One of the things that I heard from yesterday was a question about whether our federal funds are stable. I would say that, when our federal funds are exhausted, we will no longer have that bank, to rely upon. The thing I also worry about, however, is that, we get over $2 million a year in what are called stick factors. These are small transit intensive city, is what STIC stands for, factors, and those are performance based. And if we cut service, as much as this would require, we will likely, not hit, our stick factors. We presently, we usually get 4 or 5 of those, and I suspect, and each of those generates about $500,000 worth of additional funding, and I suspect that we would lose, several of them, if we did, had $2 million worth of cuts, which would then, mean that we would have to have, more cuts, on top of that. And so I do have a concern about spiraling, because of that. The last item I do want to mention is that, I believe that there will be legislation introduced in the House shortly, that would add transit workers to the list of protected categories for folks who are, assaulted while doing their jobs. It's something that happens pretty frequently. We've already had an assault on one of our supervisors in 2025. And so when people hear about the challenges with the perceptions of crime and the what is happening in Burlington, our staff are on the front lines of that and experiencing that. And so we're hoping that extra protection will be useful. And so I kind of went through things quickly because I hate talking to you and I'd rather talk with you. And so I'm happy now to kind of expand on any areas that you have, any questions, and move
How
from there.
many cases were there last year?
What's that?
How many cases of assaults were there?
3 that I'm aware of, but we could do, there's probably more.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Clark, for coming and presenting to us. It seems like you're in potentially the most difficult situation a public transit provider is in our state. You went from having no fare boxes to having fare boxes, I believe, at this point.
Yes.
And one of the questions that I had from our very fast but thorough presentation yesterday, was a conversation about the rates. Have you increased? So you went from being free during COVID,
Yes.
not having fare boxes, to now having fare boxes and charging.
Yes.
Do you have a sense if the services were split, what would happen in that situation? Are you recommending something?
So we are not entirely fare service because our rural service, it still continues to be fare free.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I suspect that if with the rural transfer, the TBT and RCT would continue to operate fare free service in rural.
Okay, that's important to me. I feel that if we're going to be separating out your service, which it sounds like you're amenable to, or at least not going, you haven't offered an alternative to path.
Yeah.
If I've understood the dynamic so far correctly.
Correct.
But the urban routes would still remain having fare boxes and charging.
Correct.
Okay.
And one of the things that can be confusing is that the link service, which connects rural to Burlington, does have a fare.
And it's a commuter.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
just to follow that up, how different are the fares than pre-COVID? And are you saying that during COVID, for example, the hospital that had a contract that paid for bus routes for their employees, you gave that up?
So yes and no. And so some of our programs with UVM Medical Center, with say the city of Burlington, which had them paying for their employees transit, we did not receive those funds. But we did receive funds from the University of Vermont and Champlain College, which are provide our largest source of funds for what we call an unlimited access program. We received funds from them on a reduced rate, and so we were very appreciative that they continued to support the transit, even when transit was free at that time. And as far as what we changed, in 2019, our fares were $1.50 per ride for full price and 75 cents. And that was set in 2005, I believe. So there had been a 14-year period at that rate. We went from $1.50 to $2 for the full price. And we went from 75 cents to $1 for the discounted price. The discounted price is for anyone who is under 18, over 60, or self-identifies as having a disability. Right now, about 55% of our riders receive a discount, fall into one of those categories. One of the things that is important to keep in mind about our new fare system, and people may recall that there was a delay in the return to fares because we were using some new technology, is that the new technology is much more customer friendly. In the past, somebody either had to pre-purchase like a 10-ride ticket or pay on the bus with cash. Now folks can pay with a card, pay with their phone, pay with a smart card. And I think most importantly, we have caps that we set so that when somebody is a daily rider, that they know that they're not going to be charged more than $50 a month for their service. And so in the past, if you wanted our best pricing, you'd have to pay money up front for a monthly pass. Then there's that risk that perhaps you wouldn't use it enough to make it worthwhile. Here, the system is smart. It keeps tally of how many times you've used it. And once you get to $50 within a 30-day period, the rest of your rides are free. We also have a cap per day, so that once you pay $4 for the day, then the rest of your rides are free. And those caps are also discounted. So a disabled rider would never have to pay more than $2 a day or $25 a month for transit.
When you say local service cuts, it's 1.2 million, that is urban. So
Yes.
but that could be further cuts than the links services.
So I don't believe that we will have any further cuts for Link going into fiscal year 26. I think that we will definitely have additional cuts for Link if we have a gap in 27 and 28. But we've already made our adjustments to Link service for now, and I don't imagine that happening more.
Can two people use the same card? Could I get on the bus with my card and then hand it to my friend that's behind me?
So there's protections to prevent that. The good news is that keeps people from sort of gaming the fare capping system. The bad news is it does make it more complicated when, say, you're a parent getting on and you have a child in tow, and so the driver has to do something special to allow that second charge.
Can you describe your relationship with Cider and how this might affect them?
Sure. So I think that the rural transfer is unlikely to impact Cider. My opinion from RCT is that they would continue to contract with Cider to provide the services that they do. And so I think that really what would change for Cider is that instead of Jordan, their executive director, working with us, they would work with Caleb. Now, in the future, RCT may, take a different path, but I'm not sure that there'd be much incentive for them to do that.
Okay. I asked because I think there's been a little trepidation in the change from those folks that make changes.
Yeah. Well, and I could understand because, there is an established relationship, a good partnership. We rely on them heavily. One of the things that we've even been doing more of is when they have extra capacity, using them instead of using taxi service, which has helped us significantly lower some of our costs this year. And so I think that, my hope would be, and that RCT would see what a great, asset that they have there and not mess with it.
Becca,
Thank you.
and then maybe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have had discussions in House and Senate Transportation for many years about the fact that public transportation is not well funded.
Mhm.
Although I really appreciate Mr. McDonald's presentation yesterday regarding us as one of the best funded public transportations in the country, it's still not cutting it for the average Vermonter to have accessible service. I'm wondering if you have any recommendations to us as legislators for an improved funding mechanism. Has there been one that you've said, wow, this would have made the difference for GMT,
Mhm.
or we could have stuck together, or will improve service going forward?
Well, since 1998, there have been 9 studies on transit financing. And so we all know that, exactly what you led to that question. We just haven't, there hasn't been the will, to act upon it. I will say that, GMT heard very clearly the results of this election.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the study that the Vermont Public Transit Association did in 2023, the first part of 2024, they were looking at dedicated funding sources that would go to transit, but of course those are new taxes and fees, and so our perception is there's probably not an appetite for that at this time. One of the things that I think that we should consider is that this will shock you, but sometimes there's tension between Chittenden County and the rest of Vermont. And so to me, even though a statewide solution is probably, best, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to best. And the urban system that we have is unique within Vermont. It's, for one of the things that's like one of the few areas where, municipalities provide more funds towards that transit than V-Trans does. Usually it's the other way around. And so it's just a sort of a unique being because it's moving so many people. The volume is so different, and that's a very long-winded way of me saying that I think that looking at a Chittenden County solution to a Chittenden County problem, may be a good approach. And I can tell you that the study that the VPCA did, highlighted 4 different areas ranging from car rental fee, increase to an increase in car registrations, to electric utility fee increase, and then a package delivery fee. Some of those could probably be implemented just within Chittenden County. And if that were the case, then we would be able to kind of get out of this, concern that, I've heard from rural legislators about having rural tax dollars, funding urban transit.
Interesting point. Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Okay.
Wendy doesn't.
One of the ways that I have advanced transit in my district, which is, not to rank, but obviously the best. And they are free.
Yes.
And the reason that they're free is because Dartmouth pays.
Mhm.
Did you consider having any kind of funding from outside companies or institutions?
So I think that I've considered it, but that's going to require us to sort of change our entire business model.
Huh.
I do say that we're making advancements in that area because one of the things that we did at the tail end of last year is that we stood up an affiliated nonprofit. And then that way that we will be able to apply for grants that nonprofits are only eligible for. And then my goal is that we would do development work very similar to what the other transit agencies do. Do that, but that's going to take
That's long range.
I'll also say that one of the things that really surprised me is that we received more contact or customer contacts asking us to return to fairs than to stay fare free.
Mm,
Because I think that there was the perception of a lot of the, especially commuters, that they felt that the buses were less safe when people were able to be on them all day. And one of the things that has been a real positive since returning to fairs is that prior to May of 2024, we would no trespass 2 to 4 people, almost a week for behavioral issues. And now it's more like 2 a month. And so our perception, and we've heard this from our customers, is that the rider experience has been much better since the return to fairs.
thank you.
I think also we can't escape that the mechanics of fairs are different in urban and rural, because with the smaller volume of riders in rural, you would just never be able to generate enough fare revenue to probably even pay to have a fare system. Where in urban, we are able to get, and one of the things I'm really happy about is that this committee actually had set a goal for us of getting 10% of our revenue from fares for the first 5 months of this fiscal year. We are hitting that target. Well, the goal was 10%, and we're at 9.7%. So we're close to not quite there, but hopefully graded on a curve, and we can say that we're meeting that. And one of the things that our board of commissioners is looking at is that, municipalities are paying more than they ever had before. We're asking the state for more than we've ever had before. And we're going to have a target of trying to get 15% of our revenue from fares, just because, everybody is going to need to share in addressing this fiscal crisis.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate the questions of Senator White and your answers, because I was, obviously funding is critical, and it's terrific that you're being sensitive to the most recent election, looking at that. So, as far as other entities paying, are the ski resorts paying for those?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so I will say that, the ski resorts are the primary. I think about more than half of our local match for our Washington and Franklin County service comes from the ski areas, the 2 services in Sugar Bush and Stowe.
Okay.
So they are contributing very well.
Okay, that's great. And then just a couple more questions, if you don't mind. If you can talk a little bit about the reductions in service and how those impacted folks, because one of the challenges is that we're not able to quantify the benefits. We can quantify the costs of the service, but it's really hard to quantify the benefits.
Yes.
People getting to work, people getting to school.
Yes. And so one of the things that I'll go over the reductions that have happened so far. So in December, we ended the Jeffersonville commuter. And so Senator Westman, I'm very sorry that we eliminated the connection from Illinois County to Burlington. We did that because the cost to us per rider was $63. And so obviously that's just not economically viable. We know that the people that have been impacted by that has been a small group of folks, but they've been severely impacted. The people that reached out to us were primarily folks who are working at the University of Vermont Medical Center and going to the school there. So those were the primary users. It was about 20 people. Or I should say it was about 20 rides a day. I think it averaged like 12 or 13 people that would use it. The other area that we reduced service was primarily on Saturday evenings. We did this for 2 reasons. Number one, our ridership on Saturday evenings tends to be, much lower than Saturday during the day. But also Saturdays, as you could probably imagine, is one of our hardest times to fill for drivers. And so what that meant was that much more service on Saturdays, especially Saturday evenings, was paid for by people that were either forced, which is double time, or at time and a half or overtime. And so we saw that as a fuel rides and a more expensive service because of the labor costs. But we heard very clear during our public meetings, like we had a person who stood up and says, I'm a musician and I don't have a car, and your bus service is how I get to my gigs. And, and we know a lot of folks in the service industry. Service industry is going to restaurants. Saturday's a big night. So unfortunately, that means that for folks along those routes, they're probably not going to be able to at least get to work on the bus.
Okay, so that's good to know. And then the Amtrak connection, is that still live and is that a priority?
So what I can tell you is that right now we're partnering with V-Trans to study MyRide. MyRide was a 3-year MTI grant, and that comes to an end at the end of this fiscal year. There's the potential for it to be eliminated and for us to go back to a fixed route service. And if that's the case, then I think that we are going to need to figure something out, for both the Amtrak and, I don't know if we'll need to return the Capital Shuttle because the parking situation here is so different than pre-pandemic. But we'll have to reevaluate what fixed route should look like. This I think is an example of, GMT may be sort of the first hitting the fiscal cliff, but, V-Trans and the others are coming up and V-Trans is, sort of asked us what we can do to reduce the cost of that program.
Okay. And then just one comment, when I visited in the last few months, I was really impressed by how you managed the downtown bus station.
Yes.
Because it was an area that didn't feel safe, but they had one particular employee who just was assigned that station and focused on safety of riders and treating folks who are having issues respectfully.
Yes.
But it was working really well. Is it still working that well?
I think that since the return to fares, there's still crises, but they are less frequent, and it's become much more manageable. Our perception is that they're much more manageable, and I couldn't agree more. I think that Romeo was the person that you had worked with. My background is in human services, and so I feel like, especially when we approach the work at the transit centers, that I'm still working in human services because it's very much the people that the state are working to help through its other systems, use our service, and that's where they tend to congregate.
Thank you. I'm good.
Back up to that, your free services that you offer, are those mostly medical?
So in rural, everything is free, and that includes the Medicaid rides, the O&D there. In Chittenden County, there is now a fare both for our fixed route service and the ADA service because and so that fare is double the normal fare, and so right now it's $4 for that paratransit service one way, and that's an increase that happened on January 2nd of this year. It had been $3, but we had increased that to $4. We had originally intended to have it $4 when we returned to fares, but we received feedback from SSTA that they thought going from 0 to 4 was too much at once. And so we compromised with 0 to 3. And then now with our fiscal situation, we were like, hey, we gave folks this transition time. Now we need to move up to the 4. And the double the transit rate is sort of the standard that FTA sets for the pricing for paratransit service. If somebody is on Medicaid, And if they go through a system where we verify that, they don't have a vehicle in their household, then they are eligible for Medicaid-free, transportation on our bus service. I can tell you that's a pretty, probably like a few dozen folks who get that.
And the OND is Medicare.
OND is not. NEMT or actually I should say NEMT is Medicaid.
Right,
Yeah.
Medicaid, not Medicare.
Medicaid.
And, that sounds like a pretty low number as a percentage.
Yeah, it's an extremely low number. One of the things that we did partner with DEVA because we were hoping that when we were able to return to fairs, that we would be able to essentially offer free service to folks who are on Medicaid and don't have a vehicle in their home.
Well, it's free service to them,
to that,
but it would be, we would bill off to Medicaid.
exactly.
So, someone's paying here.
There's no free lunch for anybody. You're absolutely right. And so from the rider's perspective, it would be a free ride. We had this system in place for about 4 days, and then DEVA realized that before they could implement it, they needed to have permission from CMS. And so we've been sort of waiting for that to happen. I'm not sure it will at this point, to be honest with you. And I think that with the numbers being lower than we expected, I think that we're seeing that there's not the need there that we thought. One of the things that we discovered is that most of the people that would be using that service are already using the SSTA's paratransit service, and they would have to, there's a challenge with them using both.
And why is there a challenge? I just find it interesting because, many places where, there is, it's more urban, they use, like United Health now has, Uber Health.
Yes.
And they, which is way more expensive than you would be.
Yes.
And, I really don't understand why, a bus service wouldn't be preferable.
Well, I think that, so for all of the folks that are using SSTA service, they have had a doctor state that they should use SSTA instead of the fixed route, and so that is something that we're not going to be able to say, hey, we know that you like using SSTA, but we disagree with your doctor and think you should use the fixed route. So I don't think we'll do that.
But there's a lot of places where there isn't fixed routes. Well, those medical transports are happening.
Yes.
And if that wasn't included in your percentage of a very small number of people, and I assume if it's not a small number of people, it's a larger percentage of the cost for the rural areas.
Well, I think that, so there's the Medicaid bus pass program,
Right.
which is that a small number of folks.
Yeah.
And then there's the non-emergency medical transport, which SSTA does without our involvement in Chittenden County, and they're the direct provider of that. And so the majority of the medical transportation is happening in Chittenden County is happening without GMT's participation.
But in the rural areas,
But in the rural areas, GMT operates the NEMT service.
and it's a decent percentage of cost, obviously.
Yes. Yeah. And I think for some of the transit agencies, Medicaid is a majority of their budget.
Just to follow up on that, so if the transition happens as you're proposing, would the Medicaid, I'm sorry, would that be,
Yes.
that wouldn't still be provided by,
You
you would be completely out of it?
We'd be completely out of it. And I think that that's where, when Fabel was talking about, the complication of rural service as opposed to urban service, our sort of organizational culture is fixed route. Here's the route. We're going to run by it at these times. You either get on it or you don't. We don't have, you don't make a reservation, we don't interact with you other than paying the fares. Where all of the on-demand transit is scheduled in advance, we have to make sure that you're eligible. You may be eligible for multiple programs, so does this trip get billed to Medicaid, does it get tripped to O&D, does it get billed to, you know? And so that's where, we would get out of that business entirely.
Okay.
So for
Got it,
example,
yeah.
the 300 volunteers they talked about yesterday.
Right,
And RCT is just better at it and they have more experience at it than you do.
That's all they do.
Yeah, that's all they do. And there's a lot of Medicaid.
right.
Yeah.
And that's what we do in my area too.
It's a
Yeah.
lot of Medicaid, you know. It would seem to me for the rural areas, if we could find a way to grow that, that would be not only cost effective, but it would help the people that we need to help the most.
Right, right. Okay.
So at this point, I'm going to thank you. And
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm
thank
going
you.
to take a 5-minute